Just a little extra information. It says, since division by fractions is achieved by multiplying by the reciprocal, we can save a step when solving certain equations. If you'll pay attention on this, it'll save you some time on your homework. 4m equals negative 3/8. 4m equals negative 3/8. Okay. Think about what we just talked about. We just discussed division of fractions. Does everybody, if you don't know how to divide fractions, you're not going to be able to do this. So let's take another one. 2/3 divided by 4/5. How do you divide two fractions? Again, you flip the second one and you change the division to multiplication. So this would be 2/3 times 5/4, correct? How do you multiply fractions? You just multiply the tops, multiply the bottoms. Okay, multiplication of fractions is one of the easiest things you can do. Multiply the tops, what do you get? Multiply the bottoms, what do you get? 10/12, reduce that, that's 5/6. If you do remember about cross canceling, you can do that. You could cancel the 2 and the 4 there and still get 5/6. So to divide two fractions, you flip the second one and change it to multiplication. Keep that in mind, because look at this problem we're about to solve. 4m equals negative 3/8. How are you going to get rid of the 4? When you move it over, what's it going to become? Divided by 4. Dividing by 4. Makes sense. But you've got negative 3/8 divided by 4 now. Or if you want to write it over 4, that's fine. In this case, I think it's a little bit easier just to write it out to the side since you have fractions. Dividing by 4. So how are you going to divide by 4? How do you divide by fractions? Put a 1 under it. You flip the second one and you multiply. So we're going to do times 1/4. So what I want you to start doing on these problems, instead of when you move that over, instead of saying divided by 4 when you got fractions, why not go ahead and flip it then? That's what I'm telling you to save a step. Dividing by 4, well, since it's a fraction, let's go ahead and say that's multiplying by 1/4. Division by 4 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/4. Division by 5 would be the same thing as multiplying by what? 1/5. Division by 2/3 is the same thing as multiplying by 3/2. Does that make sense? So when you're dividing by a fraction, or if you've got to divide a fraction by something, as you move it over, go ahead and say, well, instead of division by 4, I'm going to go ahead and change that to times 1/4, because that saves you some time. Because now look, negative times positive is a negative. Multiply tops, multiply bottoms, what do you get? 3/32. 3/32. 2d over 5 is 3/2. Let me show you what to do on this. And some of y'all that are just kind of staring off in space, you're missing very valuable information. So you got 2d over 5, and let me show you something that will be valuable to you down the road. You can separate that. Let me explain why. Let's come over here to the side. 2d over 5 is the same thing as 2 over 5 times d. Somebody want to explain that to me, why that is the same thing? How could I multiply that back out to prove that it's the same thing? Put it over 1, right? Now multiply, how do you multiply those two fractions? 2 times d over, so is that the same thing as 2d over 5? Yes, so can you separate if you got a variable on top? Sure. 2d over 5 is the same thing as 2 over 5 times d. So what I'm going to do with this problem, I'm going to do 2 over 5 d is equal to 3/2. Explain to me. I've got to get d by itself, so I got to get that 2/5, move it over to the other side. What's the relationship between 2/5 and d? It's being multiplied. How are you going to move it to the other side? You divide by 2/5. To move multiplication over, you're dividing. How do you divide by 2/5? So why not go ahead and say times 5/2? That's the shortcut I'm showing you. Since you're dividing by a fraction, go ahead and say times 5/2. Does that make sense? Save yourself a step. Does everybody understand what I did there? Dividing by 2/5, flip it, multiply, just go ahead as you move it over and say times 5/2. Let me show you why else you can do that. If you multiply that by 5/2, you see everything cancels? And you're left with just d, multiplying both sides by 5/2. But anyway, d equals top and bottom 15/4, which honestly, I don't care if you want to leave it like that. If you want to get some extra practice in, 4 into 15 goes 3 times. How many left over? So what's that written as? 3 3/4. Either one of those are fine. Next problem. -4/5 equals 3x. -4/5 equals 3x. And I'm going to leave some space in there so I can put my whatever I'm moving over right there. What are we trying to get by itself? So we're getting x by itself, so we're getting rid of 3. We're moving 3 over. What's the relationship between 3 and x? They're being multiplied, so as I move it over, what I'm going to do? I've got to divide by 3, but I've got a fraction over there. How do you divide by 3? You multiply by 1/3. That got rid of it, moved it over. So therefore, what do you get? Negative times a positive? Negative, multiply tops and bottoms. Excellent. Any questions? Nearly done. I'm showing you what I'm about to show you for a reason. This is going to help you. This might not be in your book, but I want you to watch it today. I'm going to try kind of give you an introduction to it, and then we'll start using it in the next few days. If you don't like fractions, let me show you what you can do. It says another way to solve these equations is by first multiplying the whole equation by the least common denominator to rid the fractions or equation of fractions. Let's talk about least common denominators real quick. 2/3 and 1/4. What's the least? Or what is a common denominator? 12. Is that the least one? Yeah. When I say least common denominators, what could I change both of these into? In this case, I could change them both to a 12. I can multiply the first one by 4, that'd be a 12. I can multiply the second one by 3, and that'd be a 12. What's another common denominator I can change 3 and 4 to? 24. I can multiply the first one by 8 and the second one by 6. I could change them both to a 24. So being able to find a common denominator, okay, that's how you would do it. You just need to know how to do that for these next problems. What if you just have one fraction? Like in the first one, 4m equals -3x. Common denominator would be 8. But if you don't like fractions, watch what I'm about to show you, and this actually, down the road, might make these problems a little bit easier on you. Once you find a common denominator, and again, we've already solved this once. I'm showing you another way to do it. Once you find a common denominator, you can take every term. How many terms do I have there? 2, and multiply it by that common denominator. Let me show you what happens. Multiply this by that what was the common denominator there? Forgot. 8. Multiply this by the common denominator. What do you get? 32 m's. Multiply this by that common denominator, 8. You get 8 over 1. 24 over 8, which is just 24 over 8. Is it not? Take 3 over 8, multiply it by 8 over 1. That's 24 over 8, which is 3. Look what you just did. Are there any more fractions in it? Got rid of every one of them. Multiplying every term by the common denominator gets rid of every fraction you have. Now, how do you get m by itself? Divide by. Is that the same answer we got a while ago? Sure. Let me show you again. To remove fractions, you can multiply by common denominators. 2d over 5 equals 3/2. 2d over 5 equals 3/2. How many terms do you have there? 2. How many fractions do you have there? 2. What's the common denominator for those fractions? Common denominator, 10. I can take each of those terms, multiply them by 10, or remember, 10 is 10 over 1. Multiply this by 10 over 1, you get 20d over 5, which is 4d, equals. Multiply this over here by 10, what do you get? 30 over 2, which is 15. See what you did? No more fractions. Multiplying every term, if you don't like fractions, multiplying every terms by the common denominator will get rid of every fraction you got. That's legal. You can do that. So what's the answer there? D equals 15 divided by 4. 15 fours. Last one of these. I think we're nearly finished. Negative 4/5 equals 3x. How many terms do you have? 2. How many of them are fractions? 1. What's the common denominator? 5. Common denominator, 5. Just if you only have one fraction, it's going to be whatever's on bottom. Multiply everything by the common denominator. 5 over 1. 5 over 1 times 4 over 5. Negative 20 over 5, which is it not much easier to cross cancel there? What happens with 5 and 5 if you cross cancel? They cancel and leave you with 1, so you just are left with negative 4. Equals, multiply 3x by 5. No more fractions. Divide by 15. X is what? Negative 4 over 15. There's your answer. So that's a nice trick that we will use the rest of this chapter. I will be doing it over and over and over. Hopefully you'll understand before we finish with it.